Hello, and thanks for tuning into what is the first episode of Look Up, in which myself and my colleague Pádraig Ó Maonlaigh will look at news stories for the week that maybe are not getting the attention that they should be getting. So, Pádraig, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Fimmer.
This is the first episode, as I say, of our new endeavour. We hope to get people talking, people reacting to the show, and maybe people engaging and sending us news stories and their take on news stories through the week. And we will talk about those and publish those as they come through next week. Pádraig, what we're going to do is we're just going to literally go through some news stories through the week. You've got a few particularly interesting stories that stand out. We're starting with the Children's Hospital, and more than 1 billion spent on national children's hospitals so far, PAC told. Do you want to fill us in on your take on that?
Yeah, so it's back in the news again this week, Finbar. It's something that's been going on actually a very long time, nearly 30 years now. I think as far back as 1989, they were talking about amalgamating Temple Street, Crumlin and Tallaght Hospital. So it's taken them a long time to get to where they are now at the minute where they're actually building it. And I believe the finish date is supposed to be around 2024. But the spend is already at 1 billion. It's projected to go well beyond 2 billion, which is a far cry from where they came from. I think projections around 2007 were 500 million. And the big problem with it, like I suppose, is there's multiple issues on it. The time it's taken, obviously, is the biggest thing. And maybe another major problem with it that I see, and it's the reason probably why I'm bringing it up, is it's a major failure of the state. Surely we're judged on how we look after our young and our old, and that should probably define us most. And as I say, 30 years almost, and we haven't produced it. And where we're siting it, the location is actually going to cause a major problem as well. There's a study recently done which shows difficulty like that families and parents have when they're actually bringing children into town, into the city centre, trying to go through parking. So this study here was actually done by the Irish Cancer Society, and they've actually looked at the costs for people to come in. I think €35 a day, on top of all the stress and everything that's coming with it. So, it's a major issue, and we really should have been there a long time ago now at this stage.
There's a lot of people really depending, I think, on charitable organisations that are often connected to cancer services themselves, like in the Lourdes Hospital, for instance, who are filling in those gaps to a degree, though they're limited in what they can fill in. And there's no guarantee that if you or your child get sick into the future, that you're going to be able to get to your appointments and all those kind of things, especially in the challenging times that are coming ahead. In terms of the Children's Hospital itself, you're darn right in saying that it's a national disgrace. It's gone on so long, and that figure that's cited of 2 billion, who knows where that figure could go into the future? This is Ireland that we're talking about. So, is there any other stories or headlines linked to this that you want to show that we might have missed?
Well, just obviously inflation is going to drive the final costs of the build up. So if we're talking about a projection that the building is going to be finished in the next 2 years, going by building costs, you're dead right. It could be well beyond 2 billion. So yeah, linked into inflation certainly, and the cost of living, that's certainly another aspect that's going to drive it up.
Another question might be, will it ever get finished? We don't know what the economy is going to be like at all in a year's time. Europe seems to be in an absolutely terrible mess. And we might move from there then. Well, there's just another wee story there, real cost of childhood and adolescent cancer. So it was estimated that over the course of a year, a family could spend €4,776 on expenses associated with attending their child's appointment. That's some amount of money, nearly €5,000. Just to attend your child's appointments. It's not sustainable or achievable for so many families. And to have that worry at a time when you're worrying about your child's life is just deplorable. Another big headline in the news this week was that Russia calls up 300,000 reservists and says that 6,000 soldiers, Russian soldiers, have been killed in the Ukraine. Vladimir Putin and Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, both gave public statements 2 nights ago, or early morning in Russia, in which they announced that there would be a call up of 300,000 reservists, so Russian soldiers who have already had combat experience and who have specialist skills. So this is not a general mobilization. People who have never been in the army or think that are not being called up for now, according to both their statements. The figure of 6,000 soldiers did actually surprise me. I actually thought that they would have lost less than that. But the 6,000 soldiers are only Russian soldiers. And I think what a lot of people in as Putin calls it, the collective West, don't realize is that it's not just the Russian army that are involved in the operations or the war in Ukraine on the Russian side. There is, in fact, a Russian allied alliance in which Chechnya, Russia, the Donetsk People's Republic, the Lugansk People's Republic, they all see themselves as separate and would account for their losses separately. I do know from my readings and my research that the majority of troops operating in Ukraine on that side at the moment are actually from the Donetsk People's Republic and from Lugansk. And so Russia has the minority in there at the moment. So who knows what the overall figure is for that side, but I'm pretty shocked. Maybe it could be up to 15 to 20,000. They did also say that the Ukrainian forces have lost 60,000 killed. And we can only multiply by between 2 and 3 the amount severely injured in that case. So we're talking about really large numbers of people who've either been killed on the Ukrainian side or who've been maimed for life. People will critique me possibly for believing the Russian figures on this. But what I have found, believe it or not, and you may not want to hear this, but what I found is when you look at Russian statements, daily statements on military operations and their outcomes, losses, where territories have been gained or lost, they're usually on the nose. And you come to know that they're on the nose because in 2 or 3 days' time or in a week's time, Ukraine will update their data to the same usually. So quite often they're pretty reliable. Irrespective if you feel that you have to take a side in this war, or like myself, you feel that there is only one side of what's happening being told and peace cannot be achieved until both sides are listened to. Irrespective of all that discussion, it is some amount of loss of life and maiming of human beings, and on a scale that I don't think Europe has seen since the Second World War. What's your opinion on all of this, Paul?
Obviously, Finbar, the biggest thing that strikes you is there's obviously the human suffering, and like inevitably, like the two things that happen in war. First thing is the truth, and that's the difficulty that you're identifying. Objective news and allowing people to be discerning on what they're saying themselves and make up their own minds, but it's very much one-sided. And obviously, then the big thing that strikes you then is the human toll. Obviously, there's terrible suffering, and aggression or defense. It depends. It depends what your perspective is on it. But either way, it's ordinary people who are always suffering. So, you know, what is the power struggle going on? And I think you're right. We certainly need to see a lot more objective analysis on this to try and move us a little bit further on with diplomacy to try and bring an end to it.
Yeah, and myself and Anna Kavanagh next week will be, let's say we don't agree on, so Anna is a co-host of ours and a colleague as well. We don't agree on the issue of the Russian-Ukraine conflict at the moment in terms of its origins and why it's happening and where it's going to go. So we're actually going to have a debate on that next week to show that we can talk about these things and we can tell truths on both sides and try to analyze and come to some kind of an approachment on this issue. Not only has there been lots of talk about the call up of the partial mobilization over the last couple of days, but there's been a lot of talk about nuclear interventions and responses and things like that by both sides. Vladimir Putin in the collective Western media has been reported as suggesting that Russia is going to strike with a nuclear weapon first. But that's not what he said, having read his speech. What he said was they would respond in kind if there was a nuclear attack made on Russia. The NATO Council, or the North Atlantic Council, which is the decision-making body of NATO sent a memo this week to Joe Biden, in which they said the very same thing to the president, that and advised that if Russia were to strike with a nuclear weapon, that the United States should strike, and NATO should strike back. And here is option 2B from that memo that was sent to President Biden's office. A nuclear response is most likely to reinforce the deterrence of adversaries, result in the assurance of allies, and re-establish the global taboo against nuclear use in the future by demonstrating the countries cannot use nuclear weapons without dire consequences. Both allies and adversaries might be surprised or perceive weakness if the United States does not respond in kind to a nuclear attack on Ukraine. And to say that the cons are a US decision to use nuclear weapons would raise challenging questions about what Russian target to hit and what US nuclear weapon to use. A US nuclear strike may restore deterrence, but it might also provoke a Russian nuclear reprisal, raising the risk of a larger nuclear exchange and further humanitarian disaster. I noticed that the humanitarian disaster concern is like just a little addendum on the end of the statement. They don't seem overly concerned by that. So both sides appear to be talking about responding if they're attacked in a nuclear fashion. But it seems to be the media that is trying to turn that into something else. It seems to me some crazed media that's foaming from the mouth is trying to actually almost create a nuclear situation in the way they're reporting what Putin said in his speech. So, and what they're not reporting, such as the North Atlantic Treaty memo to Biden this week. What do you think about this whole idea of going nuclear? Do you think it's a reality, Pádraig? I don't have any kids, but you do. Is it a worry that you'd have for your kids?
I think it's the ultimate worry, really. Ever since World War II, I think the world has appeared to make many attempts to try and move away from that type of scenario. Like obviously, like you had it all through the Cold War, where there was a fear about this. But even when it comes to nuclear power, a lot of states have been very wary of going in that direction. Obviously, we've seen what happened in Chernobyl, Fukushima, places like this. So like to think that weapons will be unleashed at any point is extremely concerning for any human being and for the human race in general.
Yeah, it is very worrying. And I'm very concerned that a lot of the leadership in the Western countries, not all Western countries, but in most Western countries, they just don't have a classical education. They don't seem to have an idea about diplomacy. They seem to live in a fantasy world, and they seem to be more intent than ever in the history of the United States to destabilize and topple any governments that don't agree with them, and to do it in a very, very detrimental way to the world. That's what I'm seeing from this at the moment. And because of the attitudes and nature of some of the Western governments in particular, I'm concerned that somebody's going to do something aloof, or there's going to be a fake claim of a nuclear attack or something like that, and it's going to snowball into an actual nuclear exchange. And that's not out of the question, I don't think. There's also this big push, isn't there, to get us to join NATO here in Ireland and to get us to join an EU army. And our defence minister, our Minister for Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney, this week again was pushing that issue. But Ireland has formed what has been called the Irish Neutrality League, which there's a photograph of them with some TDs and senators outside the Irish Parliament, which is called the Dáil this week. So that league is developing. Do you think it's going to be needed, Pádraig?
It's the rekindling of a group that was really set up in Ireland, I think 1914, before World War I. Or around that time, for Ireland to be a neutral voice, and to obviously, like at that stage we were still under the British Empire, but there was the embers were there, and we see it coming out again. We want to see actual, we want to see a little bit of meat on the bone, not just talking. Like it's fine for TDs to assemble for picture ops and to take the right position, but we actually need to see them coming through on this. Like if we look at Ireland at the moment, like we've had our seat there on the UN Security Council, have we actually used that to its full potential? Have we been a proper voice? talking about Simon Coveney. I'm listening to him, and he's talking about pretty hard line in terms of you know, it's clear that there's certainly a favor towards Ukraine, that they're not, in my view, using the diplomatic position that they have to its full potential. But as I say, like the Irish Neutrality League, they're not the only people active on this issue in the country. We have a number of groups already out there. We've PANA and we've Shannon Watch, and there's an independent campaign as well, which actually there's been a few visits to Irish waters in recent times in the Cork port from NATO nations, and some have been armed ships. So we'd like to see, as I say, rather than just words, we'd like to see maybe some of our TDs bring that up in the Dáil, you know, and get some explanation on why we're being visited by NATO nations.
Yeah, I think there is a fear amongst our politicians to question any. A lot of our politicians are career politicians, and so that ladder is the EU ladder that they want to climb, maybe to become a commissioner or something like that in the end. And so they certainly, those type of the political class, will not question anything that's coming from the EU or from Ukraine or anything like that. And I think most politicians are afraid to put their toe in that pool because the backlash is so harsh. But you did see the president's wife, Sabina Higgins, mention the fact that in a letter that there was very little talk about creating peace between the two countries and to bring the conflict to a stall or an end. And she was lambasted right across Irish society for saying something which is as natural and as rational as you could possibly say. And she was lambasted. So there is a big fear about talking about anything like this, to be honest with you. I just wanted to play a segment as the next story about, and I'll just pause that for a second, about what's happening over in the UK and what seems to be starting to develop here in Ireland too, and right across Europe. And it's the development of a union movement, a far more militant union movement, and a people's movement attached to that is starting to strike right across the UK. There have been strikes, announced strikes already happened, and strikes happening at the moment in the rail sector. And we're about to listen to Eddie Dempsey, who's one of the representatives alongside Mick Lynch of the RMT union, who has been really playing a blinder in challenging the standard mainstream and corporate narrative around their strike actions. We're going to listen to Eddie first, and then we'll just look at some other things that are happening around the country in Ireland and Europe.
We've only got one day of strike action named in the RMT, and that's on the 1st of October. So people often say to us, why don't you take strike action that affects the politicians instead of ordinary people? Well, this is the day people should be travelling to the Tory party conference. So that's one of the reasons we've picked that day.
Okay.
So we'll try to bring some pressure to bear on the people who make the decisions.
Again, it's all very well doing that, isn't it? But at the end of the day, it just causes disruption to an awful lot of ordinary people, because there'll be plenty of people who are not going to a party conference who will be travelling on that day. And again, we know that it often affects day before, day of, and day after as well. It's often not just the one day. Trains are in the wrong place, drivers are in the wrong place as well. But again, I think a lot of people are just feeling like, look, we've got a lot of stuff to deal with right now, coping with the energy bills, goodness knows, waiting lists, we've got goodness knows what going on. Vladimir Putin threatening nuclear weapons. We just don't need this right now. Can the country all pull together? Lots of talk about unity for the mourning for Her Majesty the Queen. Is this really the sort of strife and dispute that we need right now?
Well, it's not a dispute of our choosing. I mean, we've got a political class in this country that thinks the way forward is to cut taxes for the rich, allow bankers' bonuses to come back sky high, and at the same time, ordinary working people that kept the country moving during a pandemic and a health emergency, they've got to bear the brunt. That just can't be right. We're not the only people out there in dispute. We're going to be striking alongside workers in Unite, in the TSSA, in ASLEF, in the CW. The postal workers are out on strike, bus workers are out on strike in the southwest. We're seeing even nurses are in a process of balloting for strike action. This is an expression of something that goes a bit deeper than just the RMT. This is an expression of working class people in this country who've had the mickey taken out of them for far too long. And I think you're starting to see a groundswell of support for a change in political direction.
So that was Eddie Dempsey of the RMT union, putting it straight and putting it clear, and as he does every single time. But he did make a list of strike actions that are happening. Another strike was voted on 2 days ago in the Pool docks, or in the Liverpool docks, which takes in, I believe, around 50% of all freight into the UK. And they've voted by 99% to strike for 2 weeks, over the coming 2 weeks. That's a very significant decision. This is a video just of them doing that. Ramifications of Liverpool docks workers going on strike is massive. At a time when Britain is suffering from Brexit troubles in terms of getting freight in, we've got this issue with getting raw materials and supplies into Britain or into Europe even, that may originate from Russia. All of these different issues, the Liverpool dockers are now going on strike. It's a major, major development. What do you think about what's happening in the UK from the point of view of union development, militant? Because one thing that titillates me, I have to say, is the fact that both Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey are second generation Irish. And when Mick Lynch was on one of the morning UK programs recently, they asked him who his hero was. And he said, my hero is James Connolly. And then he proceeded to give the British viewers a historic outline of the life of James Connolly, which I was pretty impressed about, as were many of the viewers when you looked at the response to it. What do you think about what's happening in the UK?
I think it's very important at this stage. Like there is a huge economic problem now in most of the Western world. Number of contributory factors to that. Like obviously we've had a couple of years of the COVID, and we've had there's wars in the world going on at the minute. Very important part to be played by unions, taking industrial action, giving the working class back a voice, getting out in the streets, militant protesting. A vacuum can easily emerge when society is the way it is at the moment, with people looking for answers. And you really need strong leadership, which is pushing people in the right direction, trying to build a bit of a unity where people can come together and actually like try and get a fair deal for themselves and their families. Like I just feel like that there could be that vacuum there where there's alternative voices trying to push it in different directions, the rise of populism, things like this. So yeah, it's good to see a militant strain of unionism, trade unionism in Britain. I think we need to look at that ourselves.
Well, I think there is some signs of it starting to develop, Padraig. There was the voluntary sector went on strike in Donegal, Galway, Kerry and Cork, as far as I know, yesterday. I'm not sure what the strike plans in detail are. I'm not sure if it's going to be a rolling strike, if there's a one-day action, and they're looking for an increase in their remuneration. And also we have water workers who didn't go on strike, but they went on demonstration last Saturday in Cork. At the same time, or near the same time, there was also a very large protest in Cork against the cost of living increases in that crisis. So here's the Cork workers. So there are some signs in Ireland. Across Europe, there's a lot of trouble in with civil disobedience at times, but also just people's movements developing. On the one hand, agricultural movements to challenge what's happening with the carbon crisis, and on the other hand, there's people's movement developing in relation to the cost of living crisis. This is a video of protesters in Naples burning their gas and their energy bills. I think it's something that we're probably going to see very soon in Ireland.
Oggi nasce la campagna Non Paghiamo, da Napoli a Genova, da Milano a Palermo.
Scendiate le bollette, vedete caro, gli scarichi.
Also in Belgium, there's been significant protests against the cost of living crisis and the rise in energy prices and things like that.
Voulez-vous accepter un 0,4% pour une augmentation en parallèle des prix de l'énergie, de l'alimentation? C'est honteux qu'on doit faire.
Et non, pétard? Hein?
So very significant numbers of people out in the streets there. Even in Japan, which is known to be a very conservative society, we're seeing protests breaking out. This is a protest that was in relation to the militarization of Japan and also issues around the state funeral that was given to an ex-prime minister in Japan who was considered to be a militant and to be heavily aligned with NATO and US interests in Japan. So even in Japan, we can see that people are starting to come together and to stand up against what is the madness of the world in many ways: militarization, costs of living crisis, climate change, rules and legislation that at times seem quite contradictory, and we will speak about that in a minute. Okay, so we're going to move on now, Pork, and just a speech by an MP called Waddy or Mary Black in the UK, and I thought it was a phenomenal speech. Her body language was maybe a little bit strange, but in terms of the delivery of the speech and the content of the speech, I think it was phenomenal. And it was her critique of the Tory government over the previous decade.
Mary Black. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, for a party that prides itself on the economy, the Tories have a shocking record of running it. Yeah. Our economy has the slowest growth in the G7. We have got greater regional inequality than almost any other developed nation. Food banks now do the job of government in providing for families that are more often than not in work. Government could start solving this crisis by providing solutions like closing tax avoidance loopholes or creating a windfall tax for energy companies. But instead, we get endless bills paying lip service to a manufactured culture war. The priority isn't the economy, it seems to be things like protecting freedom of speech, and yet the Tories are the ones that have banned schools in England from using sources that are not overtly pro-capitalist. Yeah. They're cracking down on freedom of assembly and protest. They're privatising Channel 4 when the Culture Secretary didn't even know that Channel 4 receives no public money. So the argument isn't financial. And as the member for Rhondda touched upon earlier on, when we consider that the Culture Secretary was a key focus of a Channel 4 documentary once about the influence that Christian fundamentalism has over UK politics, it becomes even more concerning that this decision is political and it's personal, it is not professional. But most terrifying of all, Madam Deputy, is that this government literally want to get rid of the Human Rights Act. And that begs the question, for who do they think rights have gone too far? Do you know how scary it is to sit at home and wonder if it's you? Is it your rights that are up for grabs? We've witnessed Windrush. Our economic strategy is to open our doors to the rest of the world when we need their hard work and then chuck them out 50 years later without a word's notice. We tell our own citizens that their safety can't be guaranteed in Rwanda, but we're perfectly happy to ship asylum seekers, people fleeing war and persecution, over to Rwanda as though they're cattle to be dealt with by someone else. And despite knowing that this plan costs more than it will ever save, this is just little England elites drunk on the memory of a British Empire that no longer exists. We have the lowest pensions in Europe, the lowest sick pay, We pretend minimum wage is a living wage when it's not. We miss our own economic targets time and time again. We're happy to break international law. We are turning into a country where words hold no value. And over the last 12 years, I fear we are sleepwalking closer and closer to the F word. And I know everyone is scared to say it for fear of sounding over the top or being accused of going too far. But I say this with all sincerity. When I say the F word, I'm talking about fascism. Fascism wrapped in red, white and blue. And you may mock, and you may disagree, but fascism does not come in with intentional evil plans or the introduction of leather jackboots. It doesn't happen like that. It happens subtly. It happens when we see no, I've heard enough. It happens when we see that governments making decisions based on self-preservation, based on cronyism, based on anything that will keep them in power. We see the concentration of power whilst avoiding any of the scrutiny or responsibility that comes with that power. It arrives under the guise of respectability and pride that will then be refused to anyone who is deemed different. It arrives through the othering of people, the normalisation of human cruelty. Now, I don't know how far down that road we are, Madam Deputy Speaker. Time will tell. But the things we do in the name of economic growth, the warning signs are there for everyone else to see, whether they admit it or not.
I think that was a phenomenal speech. What do you think, Park?
Yeah, I would certainly agree, and it's the nail on the head a bit. We're living in an era right now which is like, it's almost corporatism infused with a technocracy. So her sentiments there, I hadn't seen that clip, but I would agree, yeah.
If you told me that she was in the RMT union with Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey, I would believe you. So there seems to be at least some cracks appearing within the British political establishment anyway, in terms of some very vociferous and very powerful speakers and maybe future leaders, both in terms of unions and in terms of politics as well. So that was Wadeen Black. I think it's a Scottish name, so I'm just trying to pronounce it as though I would if I was saying it in an Irish context. You want to talk a little bit about neutrality. We did mention the Irish Neutrality League earlier, but did this stood out to you as something that you wanted to talk about this week, Paul?
It does. I feel that there certainly is what you could probably describe as a little bit of an attempt to soften up the Irish public in terms of Irish neutrality. So it is good to see that there's elected officials coming out and actually speaking about it, because it certainly needs publicity. Like if you're looking at what the main narrative is come from government, it's been moving the goalposts on neutrality now for a bit of time. They speak in distinction between political and military neutrality, and really what I'm trying to get back to is the Irish position should be a democratic voice, a voice of reason, and that's the way we should be using it. So I don't know if you want to flick on to the second slide there. Basically, this is going to tell you, this is a depiction of what you've got. So this is from September 11th. It's about a week old, and it's mainstream news publication, the Irish Independent, talking about satisfaction levels among Irish people over the government's response to Ukraine. So it's presenting this to the people, and it's basing it on a survey that was carried out in the European Commission. And it's telling you that 81% of people in the 26 counties expressed their satisfaction. Okay, so that gives you a certain feel. Now, when you dig into it just a little bit, you go and you actually have a look and have a look at the report from the European Commission. You can actually see the sample size of the poll is 1,013 people. So the question is, how representative is that of the amount of people that would be reading that newspaper? So it does certainly seem like a softening. Like there are other indicators that we need to keep in perspective as well. If you look going back only maybe another further 2 weeks, we're seeing news stories being carried about talking about Ireland contributing military personnel to train Ukraine's army. And surely that is a departure from both military and political neutrality. I can't see any way that it aligns with neutrality. And then I suppose if you want to try and put things into perspective, if you go back a little bit further, I think we had a piece there in the Irish Times going back to April, and that shows you that there was overwhelming support for the retention of Ireland's military neutrality. Now, just to point out as well that poll was sampled on 1,200 people, so we've got conflicting stories here. My experience and my belief is that Irish people do hold neutrality as a very dear part of their national psyche. So I think we should be very, very, very careful at the moment.
Could we even, if we were to be absolutely honest with ourselves, could we say that we are neutral from the point of view that we facilitate the US military through Shannon? That Shannon appears to be an extremely important stopover for the US military in terms of their operations, both in Europe and beyond. We are a part of a NATO project, at least one NATO project, in which we allow NATO to audit our military personnel and hardware on a regular basis. So we are a part of that. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that we are working right alongside NATO in many different countries at the moment. So to say that we are neutral, I think, and again, our position with Ukraine, I think is debatable and questionable. Just when you were saying about having a 𝗨, which is the Irish word for love, a love of our neutrality. And I think most Irish people have, and we've been very proud of it until recently, when it's been called into question so intensely by some elements in our political classes. But in the 1940s, and particularly the 1950s, 60s and 70s, Ireland's politicians, particularly their senior politicians, had a reputation as international diplomats, and diplomats that could be trusted not to take sides and to be a fair player. And that seems to be gone now. I know that Simon Coveney sometimes likes to put that over to a degree, that we're still fulfilling that legacy, but I don't think it's true, especially when we look at the response to Ukraine. We looked at some of the figures earlier on in terms of killed and casualties, and it is shocking. And I don't think our government in particular has done anything to advance the cause of peace. What do you take on the idea that if a referendum was held in Ireland on this issue, which is a constitutional issue, if a referendum was held on this issue in Ireland, do you think that the government and the EU and NATO would muster enough energy and money and everything into a campaign to actually change the mind of the Irish people and get us to join NATO?
Yeah, I think they'd certainly try, Finbar. We've seen it before, and I think all this attitude in the government, successive governments now, it's all very much interlinked with their identity within what I probably would see as a European superstate is what it's becoming. So they probably see themselves in that role. We've had it here with the Nice Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty, where democratic expressions were rejected by the establishment, really.
You were told to vote again till you get it right.
yeah, which is shocking. And I can only imagine the media campaign which would swing into action to try and get Irish people to vote in that way. But I actually believe that we would reject it.
Yeah, please, hopefully. You also wanted to talk about the National Herd. National Herd halved as enough trees to cover Dublin 5 times over. What we must do to hit climate targets. That's a story from this week, is it, from the Independent?
Yes, September 13th. Yeah, quite recent. So really, what I'm picking up on here, Finbar, I don't think there's any of us scholars in all aspects of the world. So I mean, people are they're being confronted now with the climate issues on a regular basis. So how are people being engaged? And my question is, are they being engaged really at all? And the big problem we see is that, once again, like you've got publications coming out, but where is the actual discourse where we can see some professional, some expert opinions being played out in a main place on media, where we can actually look and listen to the pros and cons, the arguments for and against the climate targets that we actually have and how it impacts on Ireland. So, here we have a direct attempt to try and reach a target, and it's talking about culling 𝗂𝗵𝗶𝗃 the Irish herd. And then in conflict with that, really, you're looking at publications coming out. This piece is from the Farmers Journal, where they're saying that Brazil is going to be adding 24 million cattle as we're cutting our herd. So if it's a global problem, we're all under the one atmosphere, like, really, it doesn't add up, and people would like, I'd imagine, to see a little bit more about this played out in front of the eyes so they can make their own opinions. The worrying thing from what I can read into it now at the moment is there's obviously everything comes in a kind of a carrot and a stick approach. So where first we're being presented with the information, and then next there's the incentives. And I think there is actually some incentives there for the 𝗂𝗵𝗶𝗃 of cattle. So again, we're seeing there's talk here of €5,000 to cull a cow. So that's going to change the perspective of farmers. They look at it in a more incentivized manner. But like, where is the actual data on it? Because surely it's a conflict, a paradox altogether, if there's 24 million being added in Brazil and we're 𝗂𝗵𝗃 our herd.
Yeah, there is, and there are serious protesting and demonstrations across continental Europe against proposed and in some cases already implemented climate adjustments, if you want to put it, or legislation that they're trying to implement, and it's coming to Ireland too. Again, they're trying to buy it out. There's also this weird talk about us replacing beef and replacing meat with insects and eating insects, and the whole thing just seems quite insane. I did notice at the beginning of this segment, you were talking about having more discussion on the pros and cons, but I suspect that it would go like every other discussion, and it would become heavily censored, and there would be a lot of ad hominem attacks on people who challenged the standard state and government's narratives on these cutbacks in terms of herds and things like that. I have seen a number of people who are qualified professional climatologists who've tried to challenge the narrative on climate change, and they have been shot down, and they have been dismantled as human beings sometimes in the commentary that came back to them and the response to them. You just wanted to talk about coronavirus as well, Pádraig, where the 85,000 death toll forecast is coming from and why it's Ireland's worst case scenario.
So Finbar, this would have been put out at the beginning of COVID, and the big thing to look at this in contrast between the previous article we're looking at and on the climate issue is that it's all based on scientific modelling. Scientific modelling, like, in this case, we're bringing it back and we're saying 85,000, like, it wasn't exactly on the money, So if we're relying on modelling, we're relying on modelling for every major big departure that we're seeing in fundamental social and economic change. It's a bit unnerving, to be honest, and you'd really like to see a little bit more discourse that you can get involved in, you can have a look at, and let them win you over with the argument, So I think there was major censorship on COVID. And I think there's
major censorship on all of the key issues that are not being discussed other than on platforms like our platform. You also had a little story here about 𝗪𝗔 Sunak and COVID. 𝗪𝗔 Sunak claims he was gagged over negative effects of COVID lockdowns and scientists had too much influence.
Yeah, so again, I suppose this is just an indicator that here's a very senior member of the British government, former Chancellor, recently contested the Tory party leadership, and it's been reported that he's come out and he's kind of spoke out, and he believes that he was gagged to a degree. So during the period of COVID, there was a high level of censorship of dissenting voices, and here's a very, very senior figure in the British government who had a dissenting voice, and by his own admission, he was gagged. So again, I think empowering scientists, he felt it was wrong. I think science is an absolutely brilliant thing, but it's got to stand up to scrutiny. It's got to be transparent. So that's the problem.
I think what my concern about this story, A, it's from Sky News, B, it's on what 𝗪𝗔 Sunak has said, and C, it was a statement that was made about a week before the Tory party election of his new leader. So to me, I suspect he's just trying to court the argumentarians or the contrarians in the Conservative Party to try to get their votes in some kind of a desperate effort. I wouldn't put too much emphasis on what Rishi Sunak says. The next story, sorry for jumping on to that. I've seen every week, every day almost, footage coming off out of Dublin, and in particular Dublin in Ireland, and in particular O'Connell Street, which is the main street in Dublin, which is the capital of Ireland. Horrific pictures on a daily basis almost. It makes the place look terrible. Maybe the place is terrible. Is it a sign of our culture? Is it a sign of the degradation of our society when we find that there's alcoholism, drug abuse, violence right across the city day and night? And it's what our visitors see, it's what we see, it's what our children see when they go to visit their city centre. There was a video come out in the last few days about serious social unrest in the outskirts of suburbs of Dublin, in which police cars, or Garda cars as we call them here in Ireland, were rammed, and it was just mayhem and riotous behaviour, and there was no control on it, and there was very little Garda presence at it. This video I saw yesterday and it shocked me. It's from the Spar on Dame Street in Dublin. I'm not sure when this happened, but I presume that it happened very recently. And it's of an attack, a fight which turns into a stabbing, in which what appears to be a young woman is viciously trying to stab and to kill another young woman. We're not looking at this to take any pleasure out of the gory details, as much as it is to look what happens in the middle of a shop in Dublin city centre in what I think was maybe not the middle of the day, in the evening time, but there were certainly other people there in the store at the time.
Here we go. Jesus, the tall one is fucking backing off, man. Fair play to the smaller one. You got boy right now, man. Oh, she's slashing her face. Slashing her face. She got a fucking blade on her, is she? Yeah. Got a blade on her. Jesus. Oh, jeez, she's leaking her out, man. She's fucking leaking her. Oh, she got the fucking blade on her. She's leaking the shit over. Jesus. Hey, that's it. Get out of the shop.
I don't think we have to see any more of that, but it would be a shocking scene to see at any time of the day or night. And if you had children in the shop or something like that, what a terrible thing to have to witness. Do you think that Irish society is reducing in its friendliness, in its passivity as that once existed, in its social cohesion? And I'm not inferring anyway any racial issues or anything like that. Do you think that Irish society is getting worse in terms of incidents like this?
I think clearly, like it has got a problem. It seems that, you know, at the ordinary people's level, that there's just so many types of division. Just the ordinary working people, there's so many types of division that is sowed into society, that these sort of things can happen in the vacuum. No, but I would agree. Like there certainly is an issue there, we do need to try and police that a little bit better. But look, that's surely going to be picked up by the Gardaí, because I think looking at that just on a phone, I'm sure there's plenty of cameras in there in the shop itself. So you would expect that particular one will actually see justice.
Yeah, but the amount of videos like this that are coming out on an almost daily basis from our capital city is very worrying. I know that people who may be living in much larger urban cities like London or New York or somewhere watching this will think, oh, but sure, that's just the life in the city. But for Dublin and for Ireland, it isn't, or it wasn't until recently. So it is worrying and it is concerning. We discussed that we would try to finish up on something that would make us smile, something that may give us a little bit of a giggle, or something that's a little bit cutesy, because the news can all be so depressing at times. Pádraig, I'm not sure if you come up with anything this week. I don't think we have anything for you lined up when we were prepping up the show. I do have a video of a child that has learned to talk to a goat through its own crying. Let's have a look at this. Isn't it just perfect? It's not a very long video or anything. I'm just going to play it again because the child, I think, sounds exactly like the goat. I think that child's going to be a vet when it grows up. Pádraig, we're going to finish up for tonight. Hopefully join us again next week, folks. Pádraig, do you want to close off with anything before we head off?
No, look, thanks very much for having me on. It's great to have a look at trying to bring something back to people who don't feel like that there is a proper discourse in the mainstream locations. So hopefully we can contribute to that.
Yeah, and if you and any of the social networks watching this video and you want to put up a comment or you want to talk about any of the issues that we covered tonight or make a comment on it, we'll read them out next week to keep you involved as much as possible and to try to gauge what your opinion is, because certainly the mainstream media is nowhere to gauge opinion. If you like this video, please like it and share it and get it out there, and let's get talking and let's look up. Thank you.